This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Thank you all very much, and you're very welcome to the Institute. My name is Alex White. I'm Director General here at the Institute of International European Affairs. It's great to see so many people here in the room, and I know online also for this afternoon's session. Protecting EU democracy is one of the cornerstones of Commissioner Michael McGrath's portfolio, our distinguished guest here this afternoon. And I think whatever our political perspectives, I think we can agree that the issue, the challenge addressing questions of rule of law, freedom of speech, protection of the integrity of elections, go, amongst other questions, go to the heart of what any democracy is about. And there are many risks and there are many challenges. And sometimes it's extraordinary to think that, a range of issues that are relatively straightforward or have been for generations, and one would have thought actually settled questions in democracies, are back for discussion and up for debate again, which is an extraordinary situation for us to be in at this stage of our development. And the risks, as I said, are undoubted. They are there in relation to misinformation, disinformation, all of the issues that we're and threats and concerns that we observe on a daily basis, almost on a daily basis. And the question of freedom of speech, if I may just touch on that just briefly, and it really goes to the heart of what we're about here at the Institute, is the importance of open debate and open discussion and freedom of expression. And in fact, I was just reading this morning, having been away for a couple of weeks, that The Economist magazine had a very compelling editorial just at the weekend on the question of what it describes as Europe's free speech problem. And it was picking up on the Vice President Vance remarks in Munich and some of the related commentary from what he had said there. And I think perhaps slightly tongue-in-cheek, the editorial is saying, yes, Vice President Vance is correct. Europe does have a free speech problem, but it may not be precisely the free speech problem that Vice President Vance had in mind. But nevertheless, there are real questions for us, I think, in all countries across Europe, not just, for example, in Hungary, which is the country singled out by the Economist editorial as being a real problem and a real challenge. Perhaps that wasn't what was on Vice President Vance's mind. But the broader question of the protection of the public space, the freedom for there to be an exchange of views, which is unrestricted save in very extreme circumstances, where I think the liberal ethic would appreciate that it isn't the case that there can never be any restraints of any kind on freedom of speech, but that those restrictions and constraints should be at a minimum. And that has been at the heart of certainly what I understand as being the liberal ethic, and indeed the ethic of the European Union, and the philosophy of the European Union, that there should be this open engagement and this opportunity for open engagement. But just with those couple of, I suppose, just indulging my own, the option, the possibility that I have from the rostrum to introduce that question of freedom of speech, because I think it's very much at the heart of what we're about here in the Institute. I am really pleased to do what I was asked to do, principally, which is to welcome Commissioner Michael McGrath to the Institute this afternoon. Commissioner McGrath will speak to us on the topic of EU democracy and his plans and the Commission's plans to further protect democracy, both from external interference and indeed the whole question then of fostering internal engagement on these questions, which is part of Commissioner McGrath's role. And Michael was just reminded me earlier that, by the way, I think that the role that the Commissioner has is such a critically important one. And we have debates about, different Commission roles and what they entail, and countries sort of vying to get this or that role in the economic field or wherever. In my view, there couldn't be a more important role in the European Union and in the Commission than the one that Commissioner McGrath holds at this time. I think it's a really, really great opportunity And I know the Commissioner doesn't represent Ireland as such, but because his role and responsibility extends community-wide. But it is an opportunity for us, through his role and through the Commissioner's role, to engage in these questions here in Ireland, which we perhaps haven't done as much as we might have thought we should do in the past. And it's a very, very broad brief. And Michael was just explaining to me earlier, as well as the issues that I've touched on, the rule of law in EU member states, tackling disinformation, as well as improving EU competitiveness through company law and civil law, GDPR, media freedom, and a range of other points that it's hard to imagine how any one man or woman can get their head around the entirety and the extent of the brief that he has. But knowing Michael McGrath as I do, I'm quite sure that he can do that, from having known Michael in the past and his attentiveness to the business at hand. As you know, Michael assumed the role of EU Commissioner for Democracy, Justice and Rule of Law and Consumer Protection just last December, the 1st of December, under the new mandate. He, as everybody here will know, that prior to his appointment, Michael McGrath served as Ireland's Minister for Finance from 2022 to 24 and Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform from 2020 to 2022. And in other roles, indeed. He was an elected member of the Dáil from 2007 to 2024, which is where I met Michael first, when we had our various engagements on the Oireachtas Committee on Finance back in the period of the financial crisis. And I think it's fair to say, again, irrespective of your political viewpoint, that we've come a long way since those difficult and challenging few years. So anyway, without taking up any more of Michael's time and indeed your time in the audience, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Commissioner Michael McGrath.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, for that very warm introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all at the IIEA this afternoon, and to have an opportunity to discuss with fellow champions of democracy this vital issue in Europe today. And I see lots of familiar faces here, and thank you all so much for making the effort to be here. I'm delighted to see you all, and I know we're joined by many others online today as well. And I look forward to our Q&A and our chat, Alex, after my opening remarks also. But it's a great honour for me to be finally here in person to address you as Commissioner for Democracy, Justice, the Rule of Law and Consumer Protection, because the last time I addressed the IIEA was in a very different time and a very different environment. I was Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform. It was back in the autumn of 2021, and it was online because of the pandemic at the time, and that we were still grappling with, and we were discussing with Paolo Gentiloni, the Economy Commissioner at the time, Ireland's Recovery and Resilience Plan under the Next Generation EU. And of course, a huge amount has changed over the last 4 years, and we now find ourselves responding to a totally different set of challenges to those that were there at that time. And amongst the foremost challenges we face is the one of upholding our collective European democracy. Along with the rule of law and fundamental rights, it defines who we are as a community, uniting us and guiding us forward through our shared values. Historically, democracy has, without question, been the best political system for defending our fundamental freedoms and ensuring our security and also our economic prosperity. At its heart lie free, fair and inclusive elections that empower citizens to express their views and influence their future by choosing their leaders and then by holding them to account. But we must never take democracy and democratic processes for granted. That is the rock that we will perish on. With the world becoming more unstable and facing issues like rising authoritarianism, foreign interference, and the rapid spread of disinformation, we need to remain watchful and ready for what's to come in the months and the years ahead. Unlike many European countries, Ireland has remained an uninterrupted democracy for over a century, reflecting its position as a core value of the Irish people. And this is visible in its origins and indeed in its evolution over that century or so, For example, the proclamation in 1916 set out the aspiration for Ireland to be a democracy with, and I quote, a permanent national government representative of the whole people of Ireland and elected by the suffrages of all her men and women. We must recall that this was at a time when the suffrage of women was relatively uncommon. Bunnock na hÉireann, our constitution, expressly describes Ireland as a sovereign, independent and democratic state. And yet we also recall 1937 was during a time when democracies were challenged and indeed were faltering across Europe. In a century, Ireland has withstood the challenges of achieving independence, overcoming internal conflict and outrightly resisting the false promises of fascism to become one of the most stable democracies in the world. And it's something we should be collectively very proud of in this country. And yet this must not be taken for granted. Europe knows all too well the cost of adopting alternative authoritarian systems of government. Democratic ideals are woven into Europe's history and culture, from their origins in ancient Greece and Rome through to revolutionary France, the fall of the Berlin Wall and communism, and to the barricades of the Euromaidan. We all need to learn from past, and we need to remain determined not to allow it to repeat itself. Today, many significant challenges threaten the fabric of our democracies in Europe, and first and foremost is the manipulation of our online information space. Attempts to influence and distort EU elections through paid vectors of disinformation and AI-generated fake news spread on social media undermine the integrity of our democratic institutions and erode public trust in them. We already have the Digital Services Act, requiring large online platforms and search engines to assess risks to civic discourse and elections from their services, especially concerning algorithms and the recommender systems that are used. And the regulation on political advertising, which will be fully applicable this coming October, mandates that advertisers disclose political ad sponsors, fostering online transparency and helping users understand the sources of messaging. But these issues are also linked to hybrid campaigns, raising serious security concerns for the EU and for its member states. Hostile actors, including Russia, increasingly use innovative techniques and new proxies to try and interfere in our democratic processes. Let us not forget that Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine was preceded by an information war and a hybrid war, including massive campaigns of interference and disinformation. Beyond these external threats, we must also confront internal challenges, particularly the growing disengagement among our citizens from democratic participation. And we have to ask ourselves the hard question as to why is that happening and how can we address it. Many citizens feel disconnected from the processes that shape their lives, and this ambivalence can weaken the very foundations of our democratic systems with dangerous consequences. This disengagement is compounded by the erosion of democratic norms in some parts of the world, and Europe is not immune. We shouldn't think for a moment that we are. Nationalistic and populist movements have gained ground, promising simplistic solutions to what are complex problems. Their rhetoric often questions the very value of democratic institutions, challenging the rule of law and the principles of liberal democracy. These threats are not limited by national borders, and no member state of the EU is safe. As such, tackling them requires a united and a coordinated effort that transcends all national boundaries. The European Commission is stepping up its support of democracy through the preparation of the European Democracy Shield, which will be a strategic framework to strengthen and to safeguard democracy in the EU and to help reinforce public trust in democratic institutions. As Commissioner, I'm honoured that President von der Leyen has entrusted me to lead on this work. It embodies our commitment for future-proofing EU democracy, ensuring it remains resilient in the face of an ever-evolving global landscape. So our thinking on the Shield will evolve as we intensify the preparation, which is now well in train. But at this stage, we're looking at actions across a number of important areas. FIMI, so foreign information manipulation and interference, including disinformation, both from outside and from within the EU, the fairness and the integrity of elections themselves, and the strengthening of our democratic frameworks, societal resilience and preparedness, and finally, citizens' participation and engagement in democratic life. The Democracy Shield will uphold democratic values and fundamental rights, like freedom of speech, assembly, and voting. Democracy thrives on pluralistic debates where citizens can freely express their opinions and have access to diverse viewpoints and sources of information. In our preparation, we will follow a whole-of-society approach, and we will consult widely among a breadth of stakeholders. The public consultation is now live and will remain open for another week. While the details of the Shield are yet to be finally determined, based on the feedback we receive, I can share some thoughts in the areas that we are considering. We're examining ways in which we can better counter threats such as FIMI and the online information wars that have emerged in recent years. These front lines extend into every computer, every office, and indeed every home. For instance, we're planning to set up a European network of fact-checkers operating in all official EU languages, which will play a crucial role in verifying information and countering disinformation. This network will empower citizens with accurate information crucial for informed decision-making. To fight FIMI, we're also exploring ways to increase coordination and operational cooperation, both among member states, but also between member states and EU institutions, and also between the EU institutions themselves. But let me be clear, defending facts is not censorship. The right to freedom of expression does not apply to incitement or to hate speech, fake accounts or bots or trolls, nor does it apply to deliberate attempts sponsored by hostile actors to influence political debates and elections. If anything, drowning out truth and genuine engagement by citizens with FIMI and disinformation is an affront to and not a manifestation of free speech. As part of the Shield, we're also dedicated to ensuring that elections remain free, fair, and secure. The Commission will always support Member States, who are, after all, the ones responsible for organising their own elections, to preserve the integrity of electoral processes and to maintain transparency and fairness, including through the European Cooperation Network on Elections. We're also looking at ensuring the safety of candidates and elected representatives, again, something that can no longer be taken for granted, including online, focusing especially on those most at risk, including female candidates, and ensuring that every candidate can campaign on an equal footing, especially in the online sphere, and that citizens have access to a range of different views. Moreover, we're working to strengthen democratic frameworks and increase societal resilience and preparedness. A resilient society requires strong institutional support systems that function as democratic checks and balances. In this regard, we aim to support free and independent media and quality journalism, fundamental pillars in an informed democracy. While the EU promotes and defends free speech, it also, along with the Member States, has a duty to equip its citizens with the skills necessarily to differentiate the accurate from the inaccurate, the informed from the misinformed, and the complete narrative from an incomplete story. So we aim to ramp up our efforts to enhance digital and also media literacy, providing citizens with the tools necessary to navigate what is an increasingly complex information environment. In strengthening our democratic resilience, free and independent media play an absolutely crucial role. They serve as watchdogs, holding those in power to account and providing citizens with accurate and unbiased information. In moments of crisis, free press becomes not just a pillar of democracy, it becomes a lifeline, giving voice to those who cannot speak out. The press must remain free from political and indeed economic pressures to fulfil these functions effectively, and we will continue to support initiatives that promote free media freedom and protect journalists from threats and indeed from intimidation. In this context, the European Media Freedom Act is a crucial piece of legislation to protect media pluralism and independence within the European Union. In addition, the 2021 Commission recommendation on the safety of journalists and the EU's anti-SLAPP directive, fighting abusive litigation against journalists and rights defenders, aim to foster a safer environment for media professionals to do their work. But future-proofing democracy isn't just about defence, but it's also about active citizen engagement and participation. We want every citizen in the EU to fully engage in our democratic processes, not just during elections, but to have the potential and the ability to do so in everyday democratic life, from public debates to policy-making initiatives. Democracy should thrive in the hearts and minds of our citizens, and civic engagement should be the lifeblood of local communities. So to encourage this, the Shield will draw from best practices at local, national and EU level, with a particular focus on young people, who are, after all, the future of our democracies. Our aim is to demonstrate that democracy is accessible, but also impactful, that democracy matters, it's relevant to the lives of our citizens, and we want to ensure that their ideas and their voices are heard and truly matter. We also recognise the crucial role of civil society and the role that civil society organisations can play. They are indispensable for mobilising citizens, advocating for transparency and ensuring that diverse voices are heard in policy-making processes. The Shield will include measures to support civil society and to empower them, recognising their integral role in fostering democratic resilience. So we are engaging with the European Economic and Social Committee. It's important we hear the voice of civil society, of employers and of trade unions as we prepare the Democracy Shield. And we will announce later this year an EU civil society strategy for the very first time that aims to support, to protect and empower civil society organisations and our human rights defenders in the EU. It will include a civil dialogue platform for direct discussion between the Commission and civil society on democracy, rule of law, fundamental rights and civic space. A key goal is to improve early detection and monitoring of threats in civic space. We are running a public consultation on the proposed civil society strategy until the 4th of June. To conclude, let me stress once more that no nation is immune to threats to our democracy. As we work towards a future built on trust, engagement and resilience, we are reminded that the European Union is a project for peace, prosperity and democratic values, benefiting all of our citizens. This was brought home to me in a very direct way just a couple of weeks ago when I had the opportunity to visit Lviv in Ukraine on Europe Day on the 9th of May. Despite the many challenges, the Commission remains absolutely committed to these principles and these values, but we need your assistance to give expression to them in our daily work. In fact, democracy, prosperity and security guide all the actions of the European Commission under this mandate, as President von der Leyen often recalls in our meetings. Let us also remember that the strength of our democracies lies in unity, in standing together. Every member state and every one of us has a crucial role to play in protecting and strengthening our democratic foundations. They need reinvestment, they need to be nurtured, they need to be protected, they need to be supported. We cannot assume that they will just always be there. So thank you for your attention to these opening remarks, and I look forward now to our discussion and also to our continued work together to future-proof EU democracy. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And just that final thought that you had there about the necessity to continuously reinvest, and it's a bit like, probably not a great analogy these days, talk about oil and petrol in cars, but it's a little bit like the oil in the car. You just have to keep it, you just have to keep refilling it all the time. It's not something that will just naturally come up or naturally be there all the time. It has to be attended to. You have to be constantly vigilant and have policies that will address and readdress and reinvest in all of these principles. You've touched on the agenda, the critical agenda that you have, and it covers so much. And there was a lot that I think people will find enormously encouraging in the plans that you've laid out. Do you want to just, before we go to the audience, and by the way, we welcome questions from the audience here in person, the simple expedient of putting up your hand. If you're online, you can put a question in through the Q&A facility that you'll find there, that you're very familiar with at this stage. And we'll try to come to as many of those questions as we can. But just while you're thinking about your questions, I wonder, Michael, just 6 months of it or so you're in now. Would you just go a few minutes just of reflection? I mean, when you consider the task, all of the 27 different legal systems, some of them are slightly similar, but they really are all separate in terms of their internal jurisdictions. The complexity of the work that requires to be done in the Commission, the length of time it takes to legislate, all of these challenges. What's it been like for those 6 months? And are you encouraged by the opportunity, or are you feeling a little constrained by all of the limitations that must be there?
Thank you, Alex. Look, I think it's been an incredibly steep learning curve in a good way. And I think it does take time to fully get up to speed, to get to grips with what is a complex system. The Commission is a very large organization, so getting to understand all of the different terminology, the different meeting configurations that take place, building the relationships with important colleagues and stakeholders, learning how to influence decisions beyond your own portfolio. So learning process has taken certainly an amount of time, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it. You spoke at the beginning about the diversity of the portfolio, and it is incredibly broad and diverse, but also impactful and critically important. And what we're discussing today is very much at the heart of it, and is inextricably linked to the issues around rule of law, because where you see rule of law being undermined, that is the path to undermining democracy. And so the two are inextricably linked. So it's good that I have rule of law and I have democracy. And then having the justice portfolio allows me to introduce certain reforms across criminal law, company law, but also civil law. And then, even though they might seem unrelated, having the area of consumer protection does synchronize with the remainder of the portfolio, because everybody is a consumer. And if we can demonstrate the power of the EU working with the member states to legislate, to implement and to enforce consumer law in the interests of consumers, it will be another powerful example of the power of the European Union and how it can be a force for good. Because again, in the same way as so many of our social rights and employment law, also consumer law, much of it originates within the European Union. So incredibly broad, diverse portfolio, thoroughly enjoying it. I have a super team. You get to build your own cabinet. They have to come from, all over Europe, from within the Commission and from outside. I'm very fortunate to have Fiona Canab-Lunny as head of the cabinet, somebody with huge experience in the Commission and also in the Department of Foreign Affairs here in Ireland, and to have colleagues from all across Europe serving within the cabinet. And then I'm working with the DG for Justice and Consumers, with whom we engage on a day-to-day basis. So it's been fascinating, but also the ability to involve yourself in all of the other portfolio areas, whether it be EU-US trade talks or the project groups I'm involved in, such as AI and startups and scale-ups, or savings and investment union, the internal security strategy. So to be able to bring the experience that I've gained here in Ireland across a number of different portfolios and to make a contribution at the college table every week and in the project groups is a phenomenal opportunity, and it's one that I'm thoroughly enjoying.
Sure. Now, I'd like to invite questions from our audience. I see 2 hands already. Just let me get a sense of how many people are interested. That's great. And what I will do is I'll note that, and I will start just here in the middle, please. I will come to those who've indicated. While you're just preparing your question, can I thank the Department of Foreign Affairs, by the way, for their support for this event and for this stream of work here in the Institute, Future Proofing Europe. Stream of events, and Jill Donoghue is with us here, and her colleagues, my colleagues, thank them all for their work on this work stream. It's really critically important for us.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Yeah.
One more interruption. Please say who you are and your designation if you have.
Thank you very much. Claudia Badulescu from Free University of Brussels. I'm a researcher focusing on the EU's role in promoting and protecting democracy in the EU neighborhood. So I'd like to hear your view with regards to what the EU does in this regard, in promoting and protecting democracy in the neighborhood, the extent to which you see this democracy promotion as a sort of transactional, a part of a transaction, and how far can we give in to some things in the neighborhood and overlook democracy at the expense of some strategic interests for the EU? That would be one. And what is your view on the Romanian presidential elections that we've just had yesterday? Thank you.
Well, first of all, on the neighbourhood, we are going to include enlargement neighbourhood countries in the scope of the Democracy Shield. So we are going to consider the impact of the Shield and the measures that we will be proposing on the neighbourhood. Secondly, we have since last year included certain enlargement countries in the Rule of Law report. So we have started with Montenegro, Albania, North Macedonia and Serbia. We will continue with them in the 2025 version of the Rule of Law report as well. And in addition, a lot of my work and the work of my Directorate General is engaging with the enlargement countries on the rule of law and justice-related reforms. Because under the fundamentals first approach, countries have to get beyond the minimum requirements that we have on justice and rule of law before they can progress further on the enlargement path. So we're engaging very directly with our colleagues in Ukraine quite a lot in relation to their justice system, rule of law, anti-corruption measures, to make sure that they meet our European standards, so that then they can progress on to the remaining stages of the accession path. So those are a number of examples of how the neighbourhood is directly relevant to the work on democracy, rule of law, and then of course the accession pathway. On the Romanian election, look, the people clearly had a choice between somebody who wanted to pull them in a direction that was not towards European integration or was not even in favour of the work we're doing in the EU, and that made a lot of statements that were apparently pro-Russia and so on. And on the other hand, a centrist candidate who has reaffirmed European values, the importance of working with European partners, and he came out on top. And I think it's a demonstration that notwithstanding all of the challenges that we face around the European Union, that where the case is made for centre ground politics, where the case is made for Europe, people are willing to listen because they do understand the benefits of EU membership. They understand the value and the benefits of us all working together in the common interest of our citizens. And I think the vote in Romania was a clear demonstration of that. They have voted for a future very much at the heart of the European Union, and that's something I welcome.
Great. I might start putting some questions together. For the moment, I'll take them singly.
Thanks very much, Nora Owen, a member of the board here, but also I want to thank Alex for what you said about the Commissioner's portfolio, because I was absolutely boiling as I read some of the comments when Commissioner McGrath got that portfolio, and I was thrilled we got it for Ireland. Could I just ask you, you used the word disinformation a lot in your presentation. I'm not sure I can understand the difference. It's a new word in our language between disinformation and misinformation. Could you just give us an easy guide to how your commissionership can cope with that, and what exactly is or is there a difference? Thank you.
I might just take one or two others tagged onto that. That's okay. Yes, yourself. Name and designation, if you wouldn't mind as well.
Hi, my name is Orla Ryan. I'm with the Irish Times. Two questions, if I may. First of all, just to carry on from that point of misinformation and disinformation, I know you've mentioned some specific initiatives within the EU to help combat that, but if you have any thoughts on what Ireland specifically could do to combat disinformation. We're coming up to a presidential election, things like that. There's misinformation already kind of circulating in some circles, and we have a lot of misinformation and disinformation around immigration. So what Ireland specifically could do related to that. And secondly, just in relation to GDPR, Mark Zuckerberg and other tech leaders have come out and criticised some of the fines, the substantial fines that have been given to Meta and others, saying that they're disproportionate and can stifle business and growth. If you have any thoughts on that particular issue as well.
Those two.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And look, I think, Nora, that people, ordinary people, they're not going around talking about, what is misinformation and what is disinformation, but these are terms that have really, I think, grown in the last number of years in particular. The key difference, of course, is the deliberate nature. Disinformation is deliberately putting out false information, spreading it with a view to influencing outcomes, perhaps, of elections. Misinformation is not deliberate in nature, but equally can be very damaging if it's false information. But the difference is that that deliberate nature of disinformation. So it's normally underpinned by a strategy. There's a goal, there's a purpose to achieve a certain outcome. But either can be very damaging, and that's why I think it's important we do invest in providing people with the facts. At the end of the day, it's the people's democracy. They will elect whoever they want to elect. It's their choice, and we must always uphold and defend the right of people to freely choose their representatives, but they should be doing so based on informed opinions. They should have the information that they need to make up their own mind, or at least know where they can access it. And also, we have a duty, I think, to inform people where information is being brought forward that is blatantly incorrect, because the last thing we want is people to be making up their mind based on information that is patently false. In relation to FEME and the role in Ireland here, of course, we have the architecture in place through the Digital Services Act. We have the National Digital Services Coordinators. We've Comisiún na Man here in Ireland. And so the Commission centrally works very closely with all of the digital services coordinators in each of the 27 member states to ensure that we have a clear and consistent implementation of the DSA rules. And those rules are there to guard against the risks that services can impose on civic discourse, but also in the conduct of elections. So the tools are there, the instruments and the powers are there. It really is about the implementation. And I know that from my own experience, the coordinator in Ireland now has been, resourced much more over the last couple of years since the establishment of the office to ensure that it has the capability it needs to regulate what is a complex and a difficult area. On GDPR, I think there's a balance here we have to acknowledge. GDPR is there to protect the fundamental right of the protection of personal data. That's recognised in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. But also we do have to consider if there are ways in which we can simplify the burden of compliance with the GDPR rules, and we are committed to doing that. So I will be bringing forward measures to ease the burden of compliance with GDPR, while at the same time protecting that fundamental right of the protection of personal data. But I think it should be recognised that the EU is world leading when it comes to the protection of personal data. It also is the basis of a whole series of international data exchange agreements that we have, including with the US. We have a data privacy framework, for example. We're about to conclude negotiations with Brazil. We're well down the road with China. We will be renewing an agreement with South Korea. And these agreements underpin the exchange of data that facilitates commerce and also the exchange of data for criminal justice purposes. And so we have to protect those guardrails and safeguards. Otherwise, those international agreements couldn't be sustained either.
This might be a good companion, actually, to Orla Ryan's question. Michael Kelly, Independent Broadcasters of Ireland, says, given that web and social media giants, as he describes them, now take over 880 million in advertising out of Ireland each year, how can the trusted media who employ professional and independent journalists be supported and made sustainable so as to counteract disinformation and misinformation? Just briefly on that, because you've covered a good deal of it.
It's a really important issue. And the reality is that the commercial environment has changed for what you might call traditional media or mainstream media. That is a reality. But yet we recognise the central role that they play in safeguarding our democracy. The EU's response is the European Media Freedom Act. That imposes obligations on member states to ensure that there is a sustainable funding model in place for independent media. including public service broadcast media. And that legislation substantially comes into effect in August of this year. So we're now focused on supporting member states in the implementation of EMFA, the Media Freedom Act, and a key element of that is around the financial sustainability of independent sources of media in the European Union. So that's where we're focused.
Okay. I did see, okay, just give an indication. Yeah, I'm going to go to Tom and Sean. Tom first over there, and Sean Haughey and Kevin Cannon. Those three, if you wouldn't mind, please. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. That was very interesting. The one thing we cannot go away from this afternoon is a complacency. You mentioned the Democratic Shield a number of times. If I was to put the bold point to you, that cannot be a panacea. Are there not a lot of other things you need to do as well?
Absolutely.
We'll take the three, I think,
okay,
probably
sorry.
best. Who else is? Sorry, Sean, yeah, over there. Yeah, we'll come to you, and I'll come to Kevin then.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation and for outlining your programme. And I'm sure we all wish you well in your endeavours as Commissioner in that regard. Just in relation to hate crime and hate speech, and in particular the 2008 directive in that regard from the European Union. I was just reading press reports yesterday that the Commission has some concerns that the legislation which we passed here in Ireland recently doesn't go far enough. Now, I would have thought Ireland, as you said in your presentation, was doing particularly well in relation to, liberal democratic values. But could you clarify if the Commission has some concerns in relation to our hate crime / hate speech legislation?
Interesting question. Do you mind if we take a third?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So that was Tom's one, Sean, and then Kevin Callahan.
Kevin Callahan from Forza. I'd like to agree with Nora, I think, in relation to the portfolio. But just kind of reflecting on last night, the relatively close vote in Romania, the unresolved situation in Poland, the surge of the far right in Portugal. These are just the latest examples of the direction of travel. And of course, we get this all the time. These are just driven by ordinary people's fears and concerns that are being manipulated. Yeah. And for member organizations like trade unions, we have a huge part to play in trying to, turn the tide in relation to that. So I'd be interested to hear, have you anything more to say in relation to the civil society strategy or the rehabilitation of, Delors Social Europe, founded on meaningful social dialogue, effective collective bargaining, adequate social protection, and quality public services, because it seems to me more than ever, although that isn't being represented in the political discourse to a great extent at the moment, that's part of the answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. The overarching point I would make in response, and I'll go through the different points, is that when people feel that democracy isn't working for them, that democracy isn't serving them, or so-called mainstream parties aren't representing them or addressing their concerns, that's when they will look elsewhere, to other parties, other groupings, or perhaps even to other systems. And so that's a question that we have to answer ourselves. And those who are involved in active politics have to make sure that democracy works for people. If it works for people, they will continue to support it, they will continue to reinvest. And so part of the answer is about looking in the mirror. It's about listening to people. What are their concerns? Why are they looking elsewhere? Why are they considering regimes that are, inherently anti-democratic, or at least are flirting with, authoritarian or regimes that have those characteristics? I think that's a genuine point that we all have to ask ourselves that question. Can we do better in serving the people and meeting their needs? And I think some of the issues that Kevin raised there are very relevant in determining people's view. If they feel they're being left behind, it's not working for them, sure, I might as well try something else. And that's, I think, something that we should consider. The Shield will absolutely not be a panacea. I'm very conscious that there's no strategy that will come from Brussels that in and of itself will do all the work. It can set an overall framework. It can provide a direction of travel. It can lay out certain actions. it can make a very important contribution. But the work that is done at a local level, in communities, in regions, in the member states, really matters and will make a tangible difference as well. So we also should acknowledge that we're building on a lot of good work that has been done. We're not starting from scratch. There is a digital rule book that we could have a whole session talking about, whether it be the AI Act or DSA or DMA. We have GDPR. So we have a lot of work done. We have the European Media Freedom Act yet to come into effect. We have the political advertising regulation that will help to provide transparency about where money is being spent and where something is actually an advert. People should know it's an advert. So that's yet to come into effect as well. And I think we should not be downbeat. I think European democracy is strong. I think it's facing challenges, but I think it is healthy. And we need to face up to the challenges with a determination. And I really believe that we can do that, and we can succeed by being honest and having open, honest engagement with the citizens about the reasons why democracy is under such pressure. On the question of hate crime, hate speech, all I can say, Sean, is I know there is engagement between the services in the Commission and the Irish government. I can't go beyond that at this point, but just to say that our focus has been on trying to get agreement on the inclusion of hate crimes within the list of Euro crimes under Article 83, which would have allowed the European Union then to introduce harmonisation. But unfortunately, it requires unanimity, and it wasn't possible, or hasn't been possible so far, to reach agreement in order to do that. We have legislation in some countries, in others we don't, and I think we do need to move collectively on that question, and we are examining whether there are alternative ways of making progress on that question, but that's something we can perhaps talk about again. And to Kevin's point about member organisations, the role that they can play, yes, so what we are going to put in place is a permanent platform for dialogue. So we have the EESC, which I think does excellent work, and I'm going to engage with them on their views on what role they can play. But we are committed to putting in place a platform for dialogue with civil society, and we're open now to consultation, as I said in my remarks, as to what might be in the strategy and what might this platform look like.
Yeah. Okay. I know I have two at the back row there, and I've got one here. Another question here. No. Yeah. Yeah, one over here to the front, please, first to Jill, and then the two, Orla and the gentleman. I'll take the three together again, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Minister and our Commissioner. And thank you for a very interesting presentation. We've been working in the Institute in our Future Proofing Europe group on the whole area, and one of my first questions was going to be about enlargement. But since we're talking about trusted sources of information, I wondered, are you considering the role of influencers? Because you spoke a lot about younger people, and they tend to source their information online mainly. And it's come to our attention that a lot of the influencers nowadays could be political, but they could be also wellness or health influencers, and could in fact steer the minds of younger audiences in a particular direction. Thank you.
Great. At the back, this gentleman there, please, you can hang on for the microphone. There's the microphone. They won't be able to hear you at the back, so use the microphone. Yeah.
Seamus O'Brien, agriculture background, Irish section of IBEC. I compliment the Commissioner on his excellent presentation and his very strong emphasis on democracy. But coming from a small country, and whether you call agriculture a minority or not, but we've always had comfort in the veto. And the veto can be political or it can be legal, but there is obviously an abuse of the veto at present time, and Hungary is the country I'm referring to, and it's on the eastern side of our European Union. I just wonder what can be done, because it can spread, and there's always a risk if you take certain actions, then a veto from somebody else stops you from doing something. So I wonder what way the Commissioner would propose or give us some belief in solving the problem.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Orla Quinn, board member here in the IIEA and former Secretary General of the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. Congratulations on your post, Commissioner. I wish you every success with it. It is so important. Having worked in the Commission myself and just reflecting on a particular aspect of gender, the Commission has always been hugely supportive of gender in Ireland. And I just think when you look at the attacks on democracy now, there is a very specific gender focus to it. We had a discussion earlier this morning in terms of the UN and women and the attacks that are taking place in the wider world. But I would like just to comment on the role of the EU in being that strong supporter always of women and the threats that we're now seeing. Thank you.
So
thank you, Orla. Yeah, some great questions. So I'll try to be brief because I know a lot of hands are going up.
More hands at the back.
Yeah,
so
which is good.
Yeah.
So Jill, yes, on the role of influencers, yes, we are going to consider it in the context of the Shield, and also from a consumer point of view, then under the proposed Digital Fairness Act. I think the key issue there is transparency. If somebody is part of a commercial transaction, is being paid to promote a product or a service, I think consumers and the general public have a right to know that. And there is legislation here in Ireland. Not every member state has such legislation, but is an area that is going to be considered. Seamus, on the veto, yes, it is challenging, but there is no proposal for treaty change within the European Union on the question of decision making. We have unanimity basis for certain decisions. We've qualified majority voting. We are facing into major decisions over the months ahead, including around sanctions, extension, for example, in relation to possible own resources, which will be relevant in the context of the new multi-annual financial framework, and also in relation to the adoption of the MFF or the budget itself, which requires the consent of all of the member states at council level. But there are no proposals or plans to change, because that in itself would require the agreement of all the member states. So it's something we have to work our way through. We've worked on the basis of collegiality up to now, but it is true to say that for certain decisions, the question of veto can be very problematic. But of course, for the very reason you've outlined yourself, countries also guard very closely the right to have that veto on certain decisions because they see it as being in their own national interest. So we have to continue to work our way through that issue. And Orla, thank you for acknowledging the positive role of the European Union on gender issues. That will certainly continue. It's an important part of the work that I do actually in the justice portfolio as well. I should acknowledge the excellent work of Frances Fitzgerald in securing the passage of the directive combating violence against women. And again, in that there was a proposal to include rape as part of that. Of course, that can affect men and women. There wasn't agreement to have that included, which I think is an issue that should be examined. But across the whole equality portfolio that my colleague Hajja Labib has, but also within the Democracy Shield, we are going to consider the particular challenges and issues facing women in our democracy, particularly candidates where the environment it can be very hostile at times.
Thanks. Can I get a sense of who back there would like to ask a question? And if you can't see me, I can't see you, if you know what I mean. Okay, so there are two people just on the outside there, the lady with the glasses, if I can describe her as such, and then the woman just directly behind as well. So in that order to start with. And then I think this just hands up again. Who? Yes, and that woman there as well. So there are those three in that order, if you wouldn't mind.
Mary Whelan, member of the Institute, and thank you very much, Commissioner.
Sorry, I couldn't see you. I know who you are, but I couldn't see you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that very stimulating statement. Can I go back to the very beginning of the session? And it was Alex's reference to freedom of speech. And my concern is, and I'd like your views on it, is how do we ensure in fighting against malign actors that we do not overly confine the space for free speech, and especially for the views of people with whom we fundamentally disagree. Because even in our discourse today, what I'm hearing is good liberal democracy people, bad far-right people. Now, that's the way I think myself, but I know that isn't correct. I know that there are people who fight within the system, against the system, and they make me feel uncomfortable, but they have to have the space to participate in the democratic debate. How do you see the democratic shield as safeguarding their right?
And directly behind you, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Commissioner, for that input. It was incredibly interesting. Colette Bennett here from the National Economic and Social Council, and I'm very much looking forward to engaging further on the civil society strategy as part of EASC. My question is in relation to, you mentioned, people who feel they're not being served and how that's having an impact on democracy, and it's having an impact on social cohesion more generally. Yeah. Do you have any comment on, I suppose, the root cause of that discontent, whether that's shared with others across Europe, and if there are any best-in-class countries that we might emulate or learn from? Thank you.
And then your near neighbour there, yeah.
Thank you. Ellen Gunning, Metacoms. My query is about fact-checking versus verified sources. Full disclosure, Metacoms provides verified sources for media. It's a resource for media. So I completely accept what you're saying about the need for media to be able to tell us, the readers, the listeners, the viewers, that the information is true. But I wonder about the broader opportunity to create something, for the EU to create something which actually allows people who access social media just to know that the source that the information is coming from is verified. I gave a talk recently in a school, and one of the students was saying we should have something like this on our phones. And it struck me that it was something too big for any individual to do. It's an EU project. But just that thought, is there any opportunity, or is there any vision that something like a verified source stamp of approval from the EU might be applied to social media and media?
Now, we're coming up on 3 o'clock, and I know you have a flight to take. I'm wondering, do you have a small amount of flexibility, perhaps 5 or 10 minutes?
Sure.
That'd be great. So,
of course,
you might maybe address those three. Can I just have an indication of who else is still interested? Yeah, here. Was there one here? Sorry, I think I missed one here. Did I? No? Yeah. One at the back. Back. One here. Anybody else going? Okay, well, we have two anyway, and somebody else, if it strikes somebody, they can put up their hand.
Yeah, look, first of all, I have no fears around freedom of speech within the European Union. It is absolutely safe. In fact, I think people have never had more freedom to speak and to express strongly held views on a whole range of different issues. Any of us only have to open up our phone or computer, we will see very strongly held views being expressed on an ongoing basis about a whole range of issues. And that is absolutely right and proper. People should have the right to do so. And as the Commissioner in charge of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, I will be the first to stand in defence of freedom of expression. So I see no grounds for having any concerns around freedom of expression within the European Union. We will always protect it and defend it. And we also need to be very clear that those who are criticising freedom of expression within the EU point to the DSA, for example, the Digital Services Act, which actually has inbuilt safeguards to protect freedom of expression within the European Union. And I often give the example around, let's say, content moderation policies, that Alex, if you say something online that doesn't suit the agenda of, let's say, a platform owner or whatever, and it's taken down, even though there's nothing illegal about what you said, you should have a right to know why was that taken down. So the content moderation policies should be clear, published, and transparent. So there are inbuilt safeguards within our architecture, to protect freedom of expression. So I think it's important we're very clear and very strong on that, because very often those that are criticising the EU for allegedly clamping down on freedom of expression are themselves very intolerant of different views being expressed.
Well, indeed, not to interrupt you, Seamus Allen, who's our researcher here in this area and does a huge amount of work for us, want to know if you would comment on what some would say is the increasing politicization of social media platforms. And what's the risk that if these are no longer politically neutral forums, what is the role for the DSA or the Democracy Shield here? So you've touched on that. You've anticipated.
Yeah, look, I mean, the
that.
platforms are incredibly powerful, and that's why
Yeah.
you have to have guardrails. And that is why we have the safeguards within the DSA when it comes to, the inappropriate use of algorithms or recommender systems to amplify certain content above all other content and to drown out other content. So the same holds for candidates getting space online. They should all have the same right to have space. So it's the use of the power of the platforms is where there could be an issue. And there are various actions underway under the DSA already in relation to the obligations that platforms have in the context of elections, and they have to take their course. But I think we just cannot emphasize enough that fundamental point about freedom of expression. It is safer in Europe than it is anywhere else in the world. And we need to strongly defend it and promote it at all times. To Colette's question about the root causes of that disconnect, perhaps, or disenchantment, I think they are many in truth and varied, and some of them will come down to policy issues, will come down to challenges that people are facing, whether it be the cost of living and inflation, the housing crisis that there is in many parts of Europe, whether it be the fear of immigration, which then gets manipulated and stoked by other actors. So I think it's a combination of genuine concern about issues, but then that is being manipulated as well. And that is what we have to guard against and make sure that the manipulation is rooted out and is addressed. And that's what we will seek to do through the various tools and platforms that we have. And in relation to fact checking and the idea of having a verified source, so I should explain and be clear that the Democracy Shield is not a review of the DSA as such. The DSA is still a very new instrument, so it falls under my colleague, the Executive Vice President, Henna Verkunnen. I work within her cluster, within the Commission, and we do work really closely together, and she is extremely supportive of the work that we are doing on the European Democracy Shield. And she has committed herself to bringing forward a digital simplification package towards the end of this year. So it's not a review of the DSA, but what we are doing is we are looking at how we can provide more reliable sources of information to the general public. There is already a lot of fact-checking being done. Can we support that better? I believe, yes, we can. I believe we can have a European network of fact-checking, and it can be very useful even in election debates. And we've seen it here in Ireland, even though it has grown organically, that where a dispute would arise, you would have an authoritative source that would say, well, actually, this is the truth. And sometimes it can be very nuanced, and it's on the one hand and on the other hand, but at least the fact
and
was
we've
set
seen
out.
challenges historically in live television, so they're kind of amplified even more.
Indeed.
They're more complex then, and trying to navigate the issue of social media where it happens there. Where is the microphone at the moment? Just check, because I've got well, to make it handy for yourself, go down the back to Dylan and then come up the front here, please, for a final. And is there anybody else, a third, to make up the round? There is a gentleman there, so that's grand. So that's three. Dylan, up to you first. Yeah.
Hello, Dylan Marshall, researcher here at the IIEA. Thank you for your very good and interesting presentation today. I have a question. I want to go data transfers and exchange of personal data.
Hold the microphone a little closer.
That you were discussing. Just that Israel is one of the handful of countries that the EU permits personal data exchanges with. This was originally taken in 2011 that permitted this exchange. And there was a review last year by your predecessor in January. And just Article 45.2 of the GDPR requires respect for fundamental human rights, the rule of law, etc. And in the review report from last year, neither of these things were included in its assessment that upheld the decision to allow data transfers. So basically my question is, given the acute deterioration of the situation since last January, as well as the ICJ decisions and the well-documented use of Israeli occupation and security forces in using AI models and data analytics to enforce the occupation on Palestinians, would you undertake or make concrete steps to review the decision authorizing data transfers of EU personal data.
Okay, thanks. And Emma, on your way up to the front, there's a gentleman there, three spots in. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner. My name is Donal O'Neill. I work with Vulcan Consultant, we're a government and political affairs company in Dublin. I was wondering if you might speak with a little more detail in relation to some of the more challenging member states. We referenced them briefly, I think, with it was Seamus's question, but just in relation to what you think your role is in working with them, and I suppose probably then what you view as being the biggest challenge within that.
Great question. There mightn't be time for a huge amount of detail, but to elaborate a little, maybe the Commissioner might have a chance to do that. And then final question here, just right in front.
Uno Dwyer, member of the Institute, former EU official in foreign affairs also. Thank you, Commissioner. And I was particularly happy when you mentioned the engagement and participation of the citizens in the whole democratic process, which is a bit of a hobby horse of mine. I'm well aware of the EU-wide Citizens Initiative, which I personally think is a bit of a bureaucratic flop. And in Ireland here, we've had very successfully, for a while at least anyway, citizens' assemblies, 99 brave souls who operate in a enclosed bubble of their own, in which Catherine Day described it as magic, what happened, where they all seemed to come to a wonderful consensus, and sometimes something got done and sometimes it didn't, but it never seemed to engage the imagination of the greater world of the citizens, good and old as the initiative was. And in this day and age where citizens of Europe and indeed the world can vote for a Eurovision song from their phones, and they can vote for the Dancing with the Stars people, and they get great involvement and in pleasure out of that. There should be some way of engaging the citizens more in the decision-making process in a way that is fun and is you can use whatever you like in the more modern technologies, platforms, algorithms, influencers, but it should be possible to imagine somehow a new way of engaging the citizens.
Any ideas?
Thank you. When you have an opportunity to reply to those three, and thank you for just staying with us for the extra few minutes. I know you're under a bit of pressure.
Look, I think actually you hit the nail on the head, and I will come back to the other questions, but we have to be careful not to give the impression that we know best and that we are lecturing people or telling people, well, you don't realize the importance of democracy, or you're voting for the wrong people, or you're misinformed. This is a delicate issue. We have to engage with people, and the most powerful tool of all is to listen. We have to listen to people about why they hold the views that they hold, why they vote the way that they hold, why they vote the way they vote, and do they have the information that they need, and can we help them to access that information? And that for me is fundamentally what our role is. People will vote for who they choose. That's their fundamental democratic right. It's a founding value of the European Union, and we must protect and uphold it in every respect. But we have to make sure that the pillars of our democracy and the pillars that support them in their decision making around rule of law, around equality, around freedom, around human rights, respect for human dignity, that all of those are fully upheld. So we're open to new ideas and new ways of encouraging member states to engage with their citizens. The conduct of the elections is a competence of the member states, so our role is limited, but increasingly there is more information sharing. I mentioned earlier on the European Cooperation Network on Elections. That's where the electoral authorities of the 27 member states come together, and we do provide centralised support to them in their engagement with the voters in the provision of information. So we will consider within the Democracy Shield what more can we do to build resilience into that system. I'll work backwards. I think, is it Donal, is that your name? Donal, yeah, Donal. So look, our concerns and our engagement with countries like Hungary is well documented. we're using all of the tools at our disposal. There's a conditionality mechanism, which is in the conditionality regulation. That's a permanent feature that will continue in the next MFF. We have super milestones in the Recovery and Resilience Plan. We've also invoked a horizontally enabling condition, a myriad of infringement proceedings. And what all of that has amounted to at the moment is that about 18 billion euro of funding is not available to Hungary through the various funding programs because of rule of law issues. Some of that is grants, some of it is in the form of loans. And it doesn't give me any pleasure to say that, because it means actually that, you know, third level students in Hungary are denied the opportunity to participate in Erasmus, which is a real shame. It means the universities are denied access to Horizon funding, but it's because of rule of law issues, encroachment on academic freedom, for example. And it's always a difficult balance for us to strike, because then in the country itself, Brussels gets blamed for the penalty or the punishment or the consequence, even though it is directly related to contraventions of rule of law. And then we, of course, have to follow due process ourselves, as is right and proper. And we refer a case to the Court of Justice. It can take a number of years. And meanwhile, the damage is accumulating all the time from the breach itself. And thankfully, the Commission has an excellent track record. It's won every case that has been concluded by the Court of Justice in relation to Hungary, for example. But I think what you will see within the new MFF is a greater link between rule of law compliance, the implementation of the necessary rule of law reforms, and access to EU funding. So the President has asked myself, Commissioner Serafin, the Budget Commissioner, to work on that issue, and that work is ongoing, and it's really important. And we also make the point to the countries concerned, and it's not just one country. We do a rule of law report in every country. We'll publish them in July, including Ireland. There will be a country chapter in Ireland, and there will be recommendations. Our door remains open for dialogue. We are there to help countries to respect rule of law, and we have to always reiterate, it is not a la carte. It's not an optional extra. It's a binding obligation of EU membership. When you sign up to membership of the European Union, it is a treaty obligation that you respect the rule of law. And if we turn a blind eye and we allow it to diminish in its application throughout the Union, that really is the slippery slope that I think we would live to regret. So we have to take firm and robust action, and it does take up a lot of the resources and time and capacity that we have, but we remain open for dialogue and to assist the member states. To Dylan's question around data transfers and adequacy decisions, and in particular in relation to Israel, the first point to make is that we have formal reviews of all of the agreements that we have in place, and the most important criteria is that the safeguards that underpin any adequacy decision or any data sharing agreement that we have with a country must be respected. The safeguards must be in place. There are lots of different tests that we have to apply, but the primary test is around the use of the personal data of EU citizens that has been transferred into that country. If the use of the personal data of EU citizens transferred to the United States or to Israel or to any other country that we have an adequacy decision or a data sharing framework with is not in line with our standards, then that is where we will act, and we have the power in the case of each adequacy decision and each agreement to step in and essentially bring about the end of that decision or that framework. So it's about the use of the personal data of EU citizens in that country, which has been facilitated by the transfer provided for in the agreement and in the adequacy decision. But all of these remain under review. And so in the same way that when I went to the US back in March, I asked questions about the safeguards that underpin the EU-US data privacy framework, because we have to make sure that the use of EU citizens' data there is being handled fully in line with our own GDPR requirements. And so that is the fundamental test. But many MEPs have raised this issue with me. I've issued quite detailed written replies that set out the legal context and set out the position on it, but it is kept under review at all times.
Well, I want to thank the Commissioner for what has been a really tremendous engagement this afternoon. The speech, the presentation, first of all, a formal presentation, and also the Q&A. And I think that, if I may say so, you've just demonstrated, and we were talking about the breadth of the brief, your knowledge, your command, but your intellectual commitment to it, and sense of a feel for all of these really complex questions. It certainly came across very much to me, and I'm sure it did to the audience as well. So we want to wish you well with the agenda that you're responsible for. Thank you again for coming to the Institute. Hope we see you again at some point soon. These are issues that are really very much at the heart of the kind of basic principles that we like to uphold here at the Institute: opportunity for debate, discussion, information, analysis. It's just what we do here. So it's fantastic to have you as Commissioner address us this afternoon. I thank also all of you who have attended, both in person and those of you who are online and who ask questions. But in particular, as I'm sure you'll agree, the thanks principally goes to our distinguished guest, Michael McGrath. Thanks for that.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.